Oh, baby. All right, guys. It is officially semi-finals round. First week of the playoffs. It had playoff atmosphere written all over it. It was really cool to see two games come down to the wire. And before I get into everything, I'm a little under the weather. I have a cold, so I might feel stuffy, nasally. So I apologize for that. But that won't stop me from making a podcast. So, this is a little bit different than what I usually do. I'm going to break this down into segments. I'm going to do the recaps of the first two games from last week. And then there's going to be commercial breaks in between. And then the second half of this podcast will be predictions looking forward to this semifinal round. And this is go time, guys. I mean, you could talk about what happened in the regular season beforehand, but all that stuff doesn't even matter at this point. You could say, oh, yo, you didn't put up that many points, blah, 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 blah. Bottom line is, you're in here, and that's all that matters. So, for the four of you that are left, we have two former champions, the defending champ as well, and we have two guys in the playoffs, one who is not a stranger to playoff football, the other got his first playoff win, and congratulations to both of you guys. And the other two, I wish you guys the best of luck. Without further ado, we're going to kick it off into the recap of the game that was supposed to be a blowout, and it came down to .84. That's the total, if I'm looking at it. Yes, .84, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, wow. It's nerve wracking, hearts pounding, trying to hold in a piss because you don't want to see what's not or is going to happen. I mean, all that stuff written all over it. It was a really fun game and it was a really cool game. Coming down to it. Bottom line is this: Odell Beckham came through in the playoffs. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, when I looked at my team, I had a lot of injuries going into it. And a lot of the DeMarco Murray situation, it was just horrible with Ryan Matthews coming back. But the way I see it, man, is like there's people that step up to the challenge, like in real life NFL football. He was one of those guys from my squad, and I was really excited to see him fight for me when I was down by God like 40 something points. Josh Brown, that's a different story. I'm not gonna talk about it, but really exciting to see all of this stuff come out. And when I was thinking to myself, I thought, maybe because I only had like maybe three players go off and everybody else not do anything, it reminded me a lot of when Allen had his title run. Unfortunately, he lost, but he only had three people go off for him and still was winning games. And it was kind of reminiscent of that team a little bit. That's just a flashback moment. Bottom line, what this matchup did come down to, though, was a lot of, this is kind of a press conference, tried swinging for the fences too much, Looked at Brian's matchups, they were all juicy as anything. I mean, you had to try to swing for the fences on a lot of stuff. And this isn't even just me. I mean, a lot of DFS guys last week got burned by Jameis Winston and Austin Safarian Jenkins. Both were complete busts. I mean, the Bucks were just not good at all. And the biggest questionable move, J.J. Nelson. I thought, Minnesota's safeties were both out, and J.J. Nelson likes to run a deep post, whereas John Brown and Michael Floyd, they only stay on the outside and go vertically down the field. I figured Arizona was going to have one or two play calls and they were going to hit it. Obviously, it did not happen, so I take full responsibility for the loss, and congratulations to Brian. He moves on, but wow, man. I mean, he probably was really nervous. I could only imagine what he was going through when Odell Beckham was trying to carry my team. But I mean, it was probably the best game, and what a way you want to start off the playoff season, everybody. Um, Jordan Reed was another guy who I don't want to leave out. I would like to give a huge shout out to him as well, coming through against the Bears, who he seems to feast against all the time. But when we look at this matchup, I mean, and the other matchup as well, I think everybody can attest to this and agree that the biggest disappointment was Brian's team. He did get the win, but he well underperformed in his projections, and he's probably very fortunate now. The one thing that he wanted to stick with his gut, but listen to my advice on the thing, was the whole Spencer Ware, Kendrick West thing. It's not that I thought that James White was going to suck. It was more the fact that when you looked at my roster and I was starting J.J. Nelson and Austin Safari and Jenkins, who are really hit or miss, you want to play it safe in that route and say, yo, I don't know which one of these running backs is going to go off. Let me get some equal insurance so that way if one doesn't do good, the other will. Spencer Ware did get hurt in that game, and that plays a huge role into your matchup coming up. That's all I was going with that. And, you know, Alshon Jeffrey came through, and Doug Martin did his usual, like, 15 points or whatever. Alshon Jeffrey stepped up to the challenge. Washington is always, like, a victim of, like, guys who could just stretch the field, like, every year. Mike Evans was probably the biggest disappointment. Greg Olsen, you can't count it because he kind of got hurt. But the Arizona Cardinals with John Brown and Carson Palmer also led the way. And that was a huge, huge, huge win for Brian. He advances to the semifinals, and congratulations, man. When we return, I will break down the other matchup that happened. And it might be a different year of playoffs, but the same man returns. Thanks, guys. All right, guys, welcome back. This is segment 2 of the podcast, recapping the divisional round between Johnny and Matt Morris. Oh boy, Matt Morris comes into his first playoff appearance and gets the guy who's been known as Marvin Lewis, and at the end of the day, he still is known as Marvin Lewis. And Matt Morris, congratulations on your first ever playoff victory in the big leagues, as you like to call it. The biggest thing for Matt and his keys to success, I alluded to in the podcast last week that Drew Brees was not a risky play because he's very serviceable at Tampa Bay. That is the only road spot he always puts up decent looking numbers at. It's just everything else on the road, he's just not that good. But he did do what I expected around like the low 20s or something. I think I said 17 to up, but 17-22 is actually what I projected, but he got 24. DeAndre Hopkins, I was right. That matchup scared me a lot because New England, they're amazing at taking away the best player on a team. But the biggest story, his team name, the bearer of the bad backs, and that's exactly what happened in this matchup. Todd Gurley, what a way for this guy who you fell in love with mid-season. The end of the season doesn't do anything, and he says, yo, Matt, I got your back. 27 points. 27 for Mr. Gurley coming at the right time in the playoffs, man. I mean, that right there, the fact that he did that and came through for you, man, like I'd be such a happy owner that happened and you stuck with him and had faith. Obviously, you probably wouldn't bench Gurley, but the numbers he was putting up were pretty pedestrian, and he just explodes for 27 on the spot. Excellent job there. D'Angelo Williams was the other back, too, that helped him out. And now, D'Angelo Williams, there's no question about it. In this offense and the volume that he gets, RB1, hands down. 22 points, way to go there. I mean, that's the biggest factor right there, man. Those backs, they came through. Thomas Rawls looked like he was going to have an okay day. He gets hurt, and that is a downside. But as far as from that, Arizona gets 15. Everything else was kind of sluggish, but the bottom line is the backs came through yet again. On the flip side of things, what went wrong for Johnny? Honestly, I do not know. Aaron Rodgers and Tyrod Taylor, the move didn't cost them anything, really. 1 point, maybe. Antonio Brown and Martavis Bryant, those two guys, I think the main issue for them not doing well was the fact that Andy Dalton was out. They had the lead, and they didn't want to air it out. And because it was a divisional game, I think they played more of a conservative role and said, yo, this guy is out. We're just trying to kill clock. This is a big division game for us. With that being said, that also hurt the value of Jeremy Hill. Now, when you're looking at it, the way his team game flow looked like it was set up was it looked like he expected Cincinnati to run the lead and get the backs going, whereas Pittsburgh would have to play catch up. It was the opposite, and it really sucked that that happened for him. Lamar Miller almost tried to carry the team on his back, and then apparently now we know why he wasn't involved, or maybe it's a cover up, but Dan Campbell is saying that he had an ankle injury, or Matt did spike his drink. So it's one of those two factors into it. But yet again, the same result happens. I mean, I could only imagine if you make it like Marvin Lewis every year and not win a game. Um, but quick recap right now. Matt, congratulations on your first ever victory. You are officially undefeated in the playoffs, and you're going against a former divisional opponent who has made you really, really pissed off. That and more when we come back. I belong to you, and you belong to me too. You make my life complete. You make me feel so sweet. All right, welcome back. Welcome back to the podcast. We are now moving forward into the semifinal rounds with the NFC conference. Game one, Paul taking on Matt. And before we break down the matchups, there is a lot of bad blood between both of these teams as far as the season has been concerned. Both in the same division. Matt feels like he had the better team all along and proved it as far as when it came down to playing Paul, as he beat him 2 times and now he gets a third. The story conclusion, will it be choice A? Will it be third time's a charm for Paul? Or choice B, 3 in a row and Matt is laughing straight to the bank as far as this is concerned in this matchup? I mean, Paul is a former champion on his resume, and he has not lost in the playoffs, if you want to go by resume. But all that is also thrown out the window when you consider what has happened. The one thing I would say, honestly, it would be more of a treat to see when both of these teams were doing so well, when Matt had a Steve Smith and when Paul had all Keenan Allen, Arian Foster, and I believe Chris Ivory was actually more consistent than he was now, too. I might be missing somebody else in there that you had, and I apologize if I forgot them. But it would be more of a treat, I think, to see when those teams were to go at it one-on-one. But nonetheless, they are back for a third time, and oh man, that's pretty awesome. Let's get into the matchups really, really quickly. Sorry to interrupt. One more thing I forgot. The fact that you know what's going to happen exactly. Whichever team loses and wins, no excuses about trades being made or anything like that. We know that's kind of like just so childish just to throw that out there and be like, oh, and then fight over it and shit like that. But we know it. We know there's going to be a lot of shit talking throughout the week, during the matchup, after the matchup. It's not going to end well for both of these teams as far as words being exchanged is concerned. Now we can get into the matchup. Okay, let's focus. Paul versus Matt, semifinals. Looking at the quarterback matchup right now, you got Alex Smith for Paul, going on the road against Baltimore, taking on Drew Brees at home against Detroit. Now, get a pen and pad if you want to cross the advantages on which team, because I don't have one right now, but I know Matt's probably running right now to get one. So here we go. Drew Brees is at home against Detroit. That is just what you want in the playoff atmosphere. I think Drew Brees looks like his old self again, coming into the Superdome, taking on a Detroit Lions team that the wheels are starting to fall off now because they started out a little hot, but since the Packers game, man, it doesn't look good for them. I get the Alex Smith matchup, but Alex Smith is not a quarterback that is going to light up a team at all. I think when Alex Smith gets his first touchdown, I think the running game takes over, and they're not going to be airing it out. The only time Alex Smith puts up good numbers is when two teams go at it neck and neck, and they're passing. I think once Kansas City gets a 10-point or 2 touchdown lead, I think he plays very, very conservative. So with that being said, I give the edge to Morris there. I think Drew Brees has a 30-plus point game, whereas Alex Smith is projected at 18. He might just get 18. So edge Morris on that matchup. Moving out to the stud wideouts, wide receiver ones, if you want to consider one of these guys a receiver one. Calvin Johnson at New Orleans taking on DeAndre Hopkins against the Indianapolis Colts. Now, this is a tough one to call because I, for one, am not huge on Calvin Johnson. He didn't look good last week at all, but the matchup seems very tasty for him to produce. On the other hand, DeAndre Hopkins has looked amazing all season, yet he has to go against Vontae Davis, who playing hurt is still looking really good. I think other than Antonio Brown, he's looked pretty decent playing hurt. With that being said, though, however, the matchup for Calvin Johnson, New Orleans gives up a big chunk of plays to a lot of speedy wide receivers, not necessarily the big physical imposing guys like a Calvin Johnson who doesn't have wheels that like he used to. I think Brandon Browner matches up with Calvin Johnson if the Saints are smart because they're both tall and they're both physical. I think this is more of a matchup suited for Golden Tate if they want to mix and match. I think Calvin gets probably around 70 yards. I'll give him a touchdown. And DeAndre Hopkins probably gets something close to that. I know he was shut out last week, but I don't see DeAndre Hopkins getting shut out twice in a row. And for that, I think it's an even draw. I think right now it's 16-15. I think it's going to be something like that. So, even split there. Ted Ginn taking on Larry Fitzgerald. I think the problem with this is that I think Paul has the wrong receiver for this matchup. Yeah, Ted Ginn is a deep threat reliant guy, and he's done it in 2 weeks in a row, which is very, very impressive for someone who's really bad like Ted Ginn. But if you take a look at the Giants' secondary, these are guys that give up plays in front of them, not deep behind them, especially Rogers Cromartie, who's been extremely underrated the last 2 seasons. If DRC is lined up in Amukamura, because I don't think Amukamura is dumb enough to have Ted Ginn burn by him. I mean, the dude's a one-trick pony. I don't see Ted Ginn having a successful game. Now, if he does, you can give me all the shit you want, Paul. But with that being said, I think there's a very safe match for Larry Fitzgerald here. I think he gets, let's call it 8 catches for 80 yards and a touchdown or something along those lines. And for that, I think there's a safer option with Larry Fitzgerald than the deep bomb. And Ted Ginn give the advantage to Morris there. Running back ones, we got two studs right now. Chris Ivory and Todd Gurley. This is another one that is really, really hard to call, but Todd Gurley just came off a 27-point game, and he gets a really good run-stuffing Tampa Bay defense, which has been a surprise because Tampa Bay has always been a joke on the defensive side of the ball. But, they are home. Tampa Bay, to me, just isn't ready yet. But with that being said, I think Chris Ivory at Dallas, though, could really have a big, impactful game. The only reason why I don't think he has a really good game is that the Jets are really starting to incorporate Bilal Powell now. Powell is healthy. Chris Ivory is not 100% healthy yet. But because I like the matchup a little bit better, I think it will cancel out both of these running backs. I think they're both good for around 15 points. I'll call it an even split as well. This is where things get really ugly in the matchup. Well, actually, I just noticed something, but I'll get to that in a minute. D'Angelo Williams taking on Frank Gore. I don't even need to go into this. D'Angelo Williams by a landslide. Jacob Tamme and Heath Miller. I understand the matchup with Jacob Tamme, and I'm looking right now that he's questionable at Jacksonville. Yeah, Jacksonville is really bad against tight ends, but Jacob Tamme, he just hasn't done anything. Heath Miller, who is also questionable. So these tight ends, it's kind of iffy, if you will. We don't know if both of them will suit up, but if both were to suit up, the Heath Miller matchup against Denver is very, very, very clever and sneaky by Morris to put him in there. I like Denver. You got to go over the middle with them, man. They'll take out the wideouts, but Marcus Wheaton and Heath Miller, I mean, the game plan worked against Seattle. I don't see why. I mean, Denver is a lot better, but they are at home. I think it could benefit them easily. Now, I was just informed that Denard Robinson will be the starter. So things are going to get interesting with a matchup between Danny Amendola and Denard Robinson. Denard Robinson is very, 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 very opportune based as far as points are concerned. Danny Amendola, he has Tennessee. They're not really that good, but he is also dinged up as well. Denard Robinson is very interesting, though. And the reason I say that, we always hear about these random running backs that come out of nowhere and they come out all the time during the playoffs, right? Could this guy be that guy and kind of make Paul's team another Super Bowl run? I mean, it might get a little crazy, but the matchup, Atlanta's they're just a mess. So I can see Denard Robinson getting a touchdown here. Danny Amendola is very unpredictable. I mean, at this point, I really don't know what he's going to do, but because of the volume and the opportunity that's going to be there, I'll go the conservative route. And Paul, finally, you're like, thank God, you'll get a point there for that. I'll give you that one. Richard Rodgers versus Marcus Colston. Okay, now I did honestly. I think I read this. I think yesterday because I actually did do this podcast, but it didn't come out good for some reason. I don't even know what to call with this. I think this is like a flyer. I would assume Richard Rodgers and Marcus Colston. If New Orleans can incorporate Marcus Colston over the middle a little bit more rather than these like little fade routes, I'd say Colston could have a sneaky good game, but that's not somebody I would like to rely on, honestly. I mean, the matchup is juicy. Richard Rodgers as well. He has a decent matchup because he goes against the Oakland Raiders, but the Raiders have stepped their shit up. But Richard Rodgers is starting to get a little bit more involved, especially with Green Bay going with the pass. Now, because of that, though, I don't expect a 28 performance from Richard Rodgers, and I don't expect the same from Marcus Colston. I am not going to go out on a limb and say, "Yo, this guy is 10 times better." Boom. No, I don't see it. So I'm going to have to call it a clean draw there. Kickers, whatever. Defensive matchups are actually really good. Seattle at home against Cleveland and Arizona at Philly. I want to easily give the advantage to Paul here. The only thing that makes me kind of steer back a little bit is, yeah, Philly is hot, but I don't think Philly's offense is tailor made for Arizona's defense. They don't have any guys that can stretch the field. I think if they are to be successful in the passing game, it'll be more of a Zach Ertz and Brent Selleck type of matchup. But I'll give the edge to Paul there in Seattle. But when we look on Monday morning and see the scores, I think Matt gets a big boost from D'Angelo Williams, Drew Brees, and Larry Fitzgerald are going to be the main contributors. And for that, I think Matt could win. And I will say that Matt gets his second playoff win and advances to the finals. So that is my prediction. I'm just calling it as I see it, if I had to predict. And we'll get on to the next. Okay, the final segment of the week is probably going to be the matchup of the week. There's a storyline between this playoff run, if you will. Rob informed me that the last two champions that have won had the number 4 pick. I had the 4 pick, then Rob had the 4 pick. Now Brian has the 4 pick. So maybe that superstition trend continues, and the fantasy gods have a way of working their magic, if you will. The other thing that's interesting that Rob told me and he picked up on yesterday was how fitting is it that because of the 4 pick, Brian beats me, who had the 4 pick, and now he takes on Coffee 4 pick. As this is like path towards a Super Bowl, that is a superstition thing that is really in the back of my mind because it's really fucking weird how that is all coming into full circle right now. But I'm going to call this logically and not superstitiously because that's what I do. Anyway, all right, let's see. We got Russell Wilson at home against Cleveland, taking on Carson Palmer on the road against the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, usually I would say this is an even draw because I think Palmer's been the most consistent fantasy quarterback. But Russell Wilson right now is on a whole nother level. He is at home against a Cleveland Browns defense that is like quitting on Mike Pettin. I think they all want him gone. Um, with that being said, I give the edge to Coffee in the quarterback matchup, but not a huge edge. I think Russell Wilson outscores Carson Palmer by maybe 5 to 10 points. Allen Robinson taking on Mike Evans. Now, there's speculation about Allen Robinson in that the Jaguars are going to move him around the field and that they're going to isolate Marquise Lee to Desmond Trufant's side. Now, if it was all that simple, now obviously I'd give the edge easily to Allen Robinson, but I just don't feel like the Falcons are just that dumb to say, oh yeah, let's just have him on him, Marquise Lee, and waste our best corner for that. You know what? They might try to move him around. Sometimes when you have a good corner like that, you got to move him around. I mean, you saw the same thing with Sherman and Antonio Brown, and Sherman is a guy who stays on one side typically. It's speculation. I am not buying it at all. I just don't see them being that stupid. You know, they obviously see what's going on in the news feed. Why would anybody tell them their game plan, you know? And I mean, if it was all that simple, I think all of us would be really good in fantasy football. But, you know, I can see Trufant shadowing him a little bit. Mike Evans is supposed to see another increase in targets without Vincent Jackson, but I don't think that's a good thing. I think we saw what happened against New Orleans. I think Mike Evans lets Brian down again. And if it goes wrong, you think Mike Evans is letting me down, Nick? Okay, yeah, I'll take it. But I really don't fucking like it that much, honestly. But the matchup with Robinson, if Trufant's supposed to follow him, I'd say Robinson hits around 14 to 15. Mike Evans, though, I don't know. I don't know if he can do it against the St. Louis Rams. I think they might be eyeing him the whole game, so I'll give the advantage to Robinson there. Alshon Jeffrey versus Eric Decker. Jeffrey's questionable, but he's played the last few games, so if Jeffrey's active, I give the advantage here. Decker has a very consistent floor, but if you look at Alshon Jeffrey's career, he destroys the Minnesota Vikings. I think other than his rookie year, he's always had beast games against him. So I'll play the history card here and go Brian for that matchup. This is a matchup I really don't like at all. Not because I think they're going to do bad, but I just the trend on both of these guys, Devonta Freeman and Doug Martin. Doug Martin plays Thursday at St. Louis. They're going to have to lean heavily on him. St. Louis doesn't have the best run D, but Doug Martin always gets 20 carries nonetheless. Devonta Freeman has been a disappointment in the second half, like no doubt. Jacksonville's a very appetizing matchup. I just don't know if Freeman can go back to being Devonta Freeman that we saw in the earlier. So with that being said, I think they both finish around 14-ish points, and I think that's an even draw for this running back matchup. Next up, we have the running backs that are actually facing each other in the actual game. Jarvis Allen and Charkandrick West. I'm looking at it right now, and there's been an uptick in projections for West because it looks like Spencer Ware is going to sit. Brian, if you're listening to this, you better be praying to God Spencer Ware sits because it could be the biggest difference for you in this matchup. I think if Spencer Ware comes back out there, there's going to be too much uncertainty in this Chiefs backfield. When I talked to Brian about 3 weeks ago, I said the only thing that I could see fucking him over is the fact that this Chiefs backfield situation is just going to be really unpredictable. But if Ware sits, I think I give West the edge here. Jarvis Allen, you know, he had good games, but those are against winnable teams. This is not a game that Baltimore is going to win at all. For that, I think West, if he gets the volume, could be around 18 to 20 points, honestly. Even though Baltimore hasn't been that good, but I just feel like he's bound to get a touchdown. Another interesting matchup. You got Gronk against Olsen, which is easily number one and number two as far as tight end production is concerned. Olsen's questionable. If he plays, he's probably going to be limited, but he'll probably still find the end zone, and you get Rob Gronkowski. If Olsen plays, I call this an even draw. I think Olsen might not get a lot of yards, but the Carolina is still trying to fight for the number one seed, and they are trying to become undefeated. I think when they get in the red zone, I think Olsen is going to be dominant. Think about when the Saints had Jimmy Graham, and then he had a knee injury, or no, it was a foot injury. And then the game back, they just used him in red zone packages, and he had 4 catches. I think it was like 30 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think that's the performance you get out of Olsen. And Gronk, you know what he does. So I think it also cancels out as well. Allen Hurns versus John Brown. Now, the reason why I want to go to the advantage matchup here in Rob Coffey is because, not to knock on John Brown because he's got a very good matchup, but and the answer can be both because John Brown and Michael Floyd both went off last week. Not went off, but had good games. But there's more guarantee here with Allen Hurns because of Allen Robinson's presence, and I think Hurns gets the advantage. I'd say Brown will get probably around 12-ish points, maybe predicting, but I could see Hurns getting like a 17-point game. I think he can take Atlanta over the top when they're not focusing on him. Tim Hightower versus Bryce Brown. This is such a like. If we looked at this in the beginning of the season, we would think this is like the harsh running backs. Honestly, man, like Tim Hightower hasn't been relevant in like 3 years. Bryce Brown, around that time, he's been a speculation handcuff, but hasn't even done anything there. Um, I won't even say this is canceled out. I think that I gotta give it to Tim Hightower because he already was in the workload system already, and he's at home, which means New Orleans automatically looks better at home. I'm gonna give it to there. There's just too much uncertainty with Bryce Brown in Seattle for me to say that's a draw. Then we go on to the defensive matchups, obviously ignoring kickers. Pitt and Tampa. I think it's a very good matchup for Pittsburgh. Brock Osweiler holds on to the ball way too long, and I think they go back to Peyton Manning come playoff time. Tampa Bay on the road at St. Louis. Case Keenum just handed off the ball to Todd Gurley. This could be a sneaky matchup for Tampa Bay, but you know what? I think both of these defenses will be serviceable. So now it is my turn to pick the winner, and I'm going to have to go without any superstitious. I'm going to have to go with Rob Coffey, and the main reason why I'm going with him in this matchup, Russell Wilson at home, I think he just puts up godly numbers. The Allen Robinson thing it could be a big factor into his victory, but I like Hightower, I like Hearns, and I kind of like Devonta Freeman for floor as well as Decker. Um, if Brian is to beat Rob Coffey, there's a lot of things that need to happen. Greg Olsen being active, Spencer Ware not being active, but I think the one thing is this, and we might know Thursday night. Mike Evans has to have a Mike Evans game. I think when Brian's two wide receivers don't correlate with each other, the team doesn't put up that much points. But when both of those guys hit, it's when Brian starts to put up 130 and above. And for that, that is your keys to success. So there's a lot that needs to happen, I think, in this matchup. Thank you guys for tuning in. I appreciate the love and the guys who actually listen to this podcast. I hope all of you do, honestly, because some of you want to see what happens. One thing before I sign off here, let me know what day is better for a meeting with you guys, the 21st or the 22nd. Get back at to me at a text or a private message. Good luck, gentlemen. Peace.